I am Mrs. Dreets, and this is my video on how to get started doing sewing. First thing you're going to need is a needle and your thread. The thread should be no longer than your arms can reach. So one length between your arms is the longest you want to use. The needle is a nice small one. I'm not sewing anything big. I'm not using heavy fabric. The smaller the needle, the easier it is to sew with because it goes through the fabric more easily. I'm going to take my thread and I am going to slowly put it through the needle head. If it doesn't work, you may need to wet the end of the thread a tiny bit and straighten it out, or recut it with a sharper scissors so it doesn't have little fuzzies. Then you are going to guide the thread through the eye of the needle. Keep your finger and thumb pinching the thread and go as close to the needle as you can. Then you're going to pull it through the needle until your ends of your thread are the same length. There's my ends, they're together. Then we are going to tie a knot. You always want to tie a knot when you start sewing. You're going to make a single knot. Just make a loop and pull the end of your thread through that loop. Just like when you start tying your shoes. You're going to repeat that to make the single knot a double knot. Make a loop, pull your ends through. I use my thumb and fingernail and my finger to kind of pull so my knot ends up in the same spot as my first one. Now I'm ready to sew. Here's my piece of fabric. Doesn't matter, I start on the back of the fabric. If you're going to sew a seam, doesn't matter which side. You're going to start coming up through the fabric, go up, down, up, down, up, down. This is called a straight stitch. I'm going to do a few stitches and just pull my thread through until the end of my knot is tight up against my fabric. Don't pull too tight or you end up with bunched up fabric. When you repeat that just a few times to get all the way across. If you're sewing a seam, it's going to be two pieces of fabric with their front sides together. Or if you're just stitching on it, you can just continue this way. And I like to do a few stitches and pull through. You can pull the thread through on every stitch. I just find it's a lot faster to do a few stitches at a time. When you reach your end of your fabric, once again, you're going to pull your thread through. Make sure you don't have any lumps and bumps in the thread. You might need to pull back and forth to get it nice and even. Now notice my stitches aren't perfect. I wasn't trying to. I was just exploring how to use the thread. I'm going to do a double knot again, this time using my needle instead of my fingers. I'm going to make a loop with the thread, put my needle underneath it, hold the corner of my fabric. As it gets close to the fabric, I'm going to take my finger over that knot and push it against the fabric so I get a nice tight knot. If it's not exactly tight, it's not going to matter. It'll just keep your thread from pulling out. Then I'm going to repeat that, make a loop, put my needle through it again, and use my finger to put it against the fabric and pull it tight. I now have a double knot at the start end and at the end. That's how you get started sewing. Thanks for listening.